My name is Karen. I'm 35 years old, and I just realized the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally treated me like an ATM only worth something when I had money to give. My son was in the emergency room, gasping for breath, and I texted my parents for help. The response, "We're busy with Margaret." My mother snapped. Then she had the nerve to insult my son, calling him too fragile and a burden. That's when I knew enough was enough. I canceled every mortgage payment, every car loan, every credit card. They had all of it gone, and I meant it. Standing in the hallway of the house where I grew up, I scanned the walls lined with pictures of my sister's perfect life, her graduation, her wedding, the birth of her first child. My parents smiled in every photo, glowing with pride, except there wasn't a single picture with me. Not one. It stung like an open wound. This absence after 35 years of living in their shadow, I thought I'd grown used to it, but here I was, heart tight and aching like it was the first time. From the kitchen, I heard my mother's voice, the same one I've known my whole life, calling out, "Karen, come give me a hand with these dishes." I hesitated. I hadn't come here to do dishes. I came here to set boundaries. When I stepped inside, Mom was fussing over a platter of appetizers Margaret's celebration. Of course. My sister had just been promoted to department manager at a local bank, a job she got through Dad's connections. Mom barely glanced at me, busy making sure everything looked perfect. "Can you finish these while I get ready?" she asked, already wiping her hands on a towel. "Your father picked the wrong crackers. Margaret prefers sesame, not plain." I nodded and took her spot by the counter, tasting the familiar bitterness of invisibility. Same story, different day. My phone buzzed a message from Sharon, my former sister-in-law. "Did you tell them yet?" "Tell them what?" "How do you tell the people who used you for years that you're finally cutting them off, that you won't be the family bank anymore? How do you explain that their only grandson didn't even include them in his family tree assignment?" The front door slammed, footsteps thudding down the hall. Dad appeared in the doorway, barely looking my way. "Where's your mother?" "She's getting ready," I said quietly. Dad nodded and disappeared into the living room. I went back to the crackers, remembering the countless times I stood in this same kitchen, desperate for a crumb of approval that never came. My life had been a series of sacrifices disguised as duty. Full scholarship to UCLA, promotion to senior analyst, the birth of my son Mark, none of it mattered. None of it got them to notice me. Margaret was their golden child born after years of heartbreaking miscarriages, the daughter they poured all their hopes and attention into. I was the practice run, the one they tolerated. When Justin left me 3 years ago, I thought maybe they'd finally see me a single mother struggling to hold it together. But no. Instead, they whispered doubts and cast blame. Had I worked too hard? Neglected my real duties? It wasn't my parents who showed up. It was Sharon and Brian, Justin's parents. They became the family Mark really needed. Suddenly, my parents were calling every week, inviting us over, offering to babysit. I wanted to believe this was a fresh start, but then Margaret's promotion happened. The facade slipped away. I was just a financial resource again. Nothing more. Mom appeared, now dressed in a blouse I had bought. "Did you finish the appetizers? Margaret'll be here any minute." I slid the tray toward her, steady but resolute. "We need to talk," I said, voice firmer than I expected. Her face shifted from excitement to dread. "What is it?" "I'm stopping all financial contributions." She blinked. "What financial contributions? What are you talking about? Your car loan, the mortgage payments, home insurance, everything? I'm done." She stared, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Why? After everything we've done for you." A humorless chuckle escaped me before I could stop it. "And what exactly have you done for me? Raised me, fed me. Those were your responsibilities, not favors." Dad stepped into the kitchen, his face darkening. "What's going on here?" Mom shot back. "Karen says she's cutting us off financially after all we've done." His eyes narrowed. "Is this about that situation we already talked about?" "No, it's about everything," I said, my voice trembling but fierce. "It's about Mark calling Sharon grandma because she actually treats him like one. It's about you two skipping his birthday to go on Margaret's vacation. It's about me needing emergency surgery and you refusing to pick up your own grandson because of a dinner." I thought about that night in the ER, the pain that nearly swallowed me whole, and the fear for Mark waiting alone at after-school care. I'd called my parents first. They were at Margaret's celebration, not even trying to hide their annoyance. "Can't his father get him?" Mom had said, as if I was asking for too much. Justin was halfway across the country with his new wife. Sharon had dropped everything. She picked up Mark. She stayed by my side overnight, rearranging waiting room chairs into a bed. That's when I saw the difference between obligation and love. Dad's voice cut through my thoughts. "You're overreacting. Margaret's dinner was important. You know how she gets if we miss these things." I shook my head, tired of pretending. No more financial support, no more pretending. "You don't get to use me when it's convenient and discard me when it's not." Mom's face twisted, not with guilt but calculation. "The car payment's due in a few days, and your father's medication. Margaret's salary could cover it. Or they could finally dip into their retirement savings they've been hoarding while I've been supporting their lifestyle." The front door swung open. Margaret's cheerful voice floated down the hall. "Mom? Dad?" I brought champagne. That was my cue. I grabbed my purse. "Karen, wait." Mom's voice cracked. "You can't do this to us." "But I was passing Margaret." I caught the flicker of confusion in her eyes. "I wasn't coming for the celebration," I told her. "I came to withdraw my last ounce of care." She nodded, unsure but polite. I walked out into the cold night, tears welling not from sadness, but relief. I was finally free. The silence after I left my parents' house was deafening. No calls, no texts, just an emptiness where the noise of their expectations and demands used to be. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for a crisis, or bracing myself for another guilt trip. But silence can be deceiving. Within days, the fallout started. Mom called once, only once, just to say, "You're making a mistake." The voice was tight, like she was trying to hold back tears or anger. Maybe both. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to hear the blame, the manipulation disguised as concern. Instead, the messages began. At first, they were polite, almost civil. Dad asking if I'd reconsider, Mom mentioning the car payment was overdue. The mortgage was behind. Margaret sent a text too, oddly formal. "Family is everything. Karen, we're here if you want to talk." But their words didn't match their actions. Within weeks, the power was cut off at the house, the bank called about their overdue mortgage, the car was repossessed. I found out through neighbors, whispers and sideways glances. They weren't hiding the consequences of my withdrawal. They were broadcasting it, trying to shame me. But all I felt was a cold numbness, like the ice in my veins was freezing the part of me that used to cry over their approval. At work, I started pulling back too. The endless juggling act of being a single mom, a high-performing analyst, and the family's unofficial banker was crushing me. I told my boss I needed to take a step back, that family issues were overwhelming. It felt like I was retreating into a shell, building walls thicker than I ever had before. I stopped answering their calls. I let the texts pile up without reply. I deleted their emails without reading them. Their attempts to reach me grew desperate, sometimes polite, sometimes venomous. "You're breaking this family apart," Mom wrote. "Your selfishness is killing us." Dad called once from a blocked number, his voice shaking with rage and hurt. "After all we gave you, how dare you abandon us?" But abandoning them was exactly what I was doing, abandoning the toxic cycle that had swallowed my youth and nearly crushed my soul. The family gatherings became battlegrounds. Margaret's eyes glittered with smug satisfaction whenever I showed up. The unspoken, "Look how I'm favored" message loud and clear. My parents were colder, more distant, their smiles tight, their words clipped. The subtle gaslighting started creeping in again. A whispered word here, a snide comment there. At Thanksgiving, the air was thick with tension. I watched as my son Mark, who had every right to feel loved and welcomed, was repeatedly sidelined. "You're lucky to have us supporting you," Mom said pointedly as I passed the mashed potatoes. Many wouldn't. Maybe because I'm done being your ATM, I wanted to shout, but I kept my mouth shut. I'd learned years ago that arguing only gave them more ammunition. Rumors began spreading too. Karen's ungrateful. She's selfish. She's trying to ruin the family. Their whispers echoed through relatives I hadn't seen in years, and some I never wanted to see again. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from distant cousins and family friends not to check on me, but to tell me I was making a mistake, that I should do the right thing and help my parents again. It felt like they were all lined up against me, and the loneliness was crushing. At night, After Mark was asleep, I sat alone in my small apartment, the quiet deafening. I questioned everything. Had I been wrong? Was I too harsh? Was my pride blinding me to the real needs of my family? But then I remembered the emergency room, the moment when Sharon stayed up all night with me and Mark, the difference between obligation and love. And I knew this wasn't about money, it was about respect, about finally saying no to being taken for granted. I started to notice the pattern more clearly. Every crisis, every emergency, was their chance to pull me back in to remind me of what I owed them. But the truth was, I owed them nothing. Not after the years of being ignored, dismissed, used. My son's well-being was non-negotiable. My mental health was non-negotiable. I was done carrying the weight of a family that refused to carry me. So I built my walls higher. I invested in therapy, learning to untangle the guilt from the love I deserved. I found strength in the support of friends who saw me as a person, not a paycheck. Slowly, I reclaimed my life. Weeks turned into months, and the silence from my parents became deafening. Their calls stopped coming altogether. No guilt trips, no pleas, just a void where family once existed. The weight of that emptiness pressed down on me, but strangely, it was also liberating. For the first time, I felt the possibility of living for myself, not as their caretaker or ATM, but as a person who mattered beyond dollars and favors. Yet, beneath the surface, questions swirled. What had I really sacrificed all these years? What was the real story behind their demands? Was there more I didn't know? The distance gave me space to reflect, but it also ignited a fierce determination to uncover the truth. One chilly afternoon, as I was going through old emails and financial records I'd saved for tax purposes, I stumbled on something I never expected: a bank statement for an account I didn't know existed. The account was under my parents' names, but the numbers were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing in and out. I froze. Why had they never told me about this? Why had I been footing their bills while this secret fund existed? The questions swirled in my head, mixing with a bitter cocktail of betrayal and disbelief. Determined, I began digging deeper. Late nights were spent poring over paperwork, bank records, and legal documents I requested quietly through friends in the financial sector. It was painstaking work, and each discovery felt like another punch to the gut. The truth I unearthed was worse than I imagined. My parents had been siphoning money from a trust fund left by my grandmother, money that was supposed to be for me and my sister. Instead, they had been using it to fund Margaret's lavish lifestyle vacations, luxury cars, designer clothes. Meanwhile, I had been quietly subsidizing the family's mortgage payments, car loans, and healthcare expenses, barely scraping by while they lived extravagantly behind my back. I felt like I'd been living in a lie, but I wasn't alone. At my lowest point, I reached out to my cousin Laura. She was the only relative who'd ever treated me with genuine kindness, and she had her own suspicions about my parents' financial games. When I shared what I'd found, her voice cracked with empathy and outrage. "Karen, you have to fight this," she said firmly. "They've been using you for years. You deserve better. Let's find a way to make them accountable." Together, we contacted a lawyer recommended by a friend who specialized in family trusts and inheritance law. Ms. Reynolds was sharp, no nonsense, and unwavering in her support. After reviewing the documents, she explained the legal framework. "There's a strong case here for breach of fiduciary duty and misappropriation of funds," she said. "Your parents had a legal obligation to manage the trust in your and your sister's best interest. Using it for personal expenses is a serious violation." For the first time, the prospect of justice felt real. With Laura's help and Ms. Reynolds' guidance, I began building a case. We documented every transaction, traced every dollar, and prepared a detailed report outlining the misuse of funds. At the same time, I fortified my personal boundaries. I blocked my parents on social media, changed my phone number, and stopped responding to any indirect messages through mutual relatives. The emotional blackmail, the guilt, the false promises, they all stopped reaching me. One afternoon, I received a letter from Ms. Reynolds. "It's time," she wrote. "We're ready to confront them legally." My hands shook as I read the words. The thought of facing my parents in court was terrifying, but the anger that fueled me was fiercer. The day of the confrontation arrived. We met at a mediation office, neutral ground that buzzed with the quiet tension of unresolved family battles. My parents arrived with Margaret, their faces masks of composure that barely concealed their resentment. The mediator opened the session with an invitation to speak. I began calmly, presenting the evidence of financial misconduct. I read excerpts from bank statements, highlighted suspicious transactions, and laid bare the betrayal I had uncovered. Their faces paled as the facts landed like a hammer. Mom sputtered, "That's impossible, you're twisting everything." Dad's jaw clenched tightly, but he remained silent. Margaret's eyes flashed with anger, but there was an unmistakable crack in her armor. The mediator asked them to respond. Their excuses were predictable claims of misunderstanding, miscommunication, and entitlement. They tried to gaslight me, to paint themselves as victims, but the evidence was overwhelming. In that room, years of silence and suppression shattered. I spoke not just of money, but of trust broken, of years of invisible labor, of sacrifices ignored. I told them how their choices had cost me family, peace, and belief in love. The mediator acknowledged the severity of the violations and proposed a settlement to resolve the financial dispute. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine and setting a clear boundary that this manipulation would never happen again. After the session, my parents left in silence. I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. The battle was far from over, but I had taken the first powerful step toward freedom. Outside the building, Laura hugged me tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You're finally standing up for yourself." That night, I sat with Mark, watching him play quietly with his toys. I realized I was building a new legacy, not one of secrets and pain, but of truth, courage, and resilience. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally living. The weeks following the mediation were a storm. My parents, now exposed, were furious but not at me. Their rage was aimed at the damage to their carefully curated image and the threat to their comfortable lifestyle. I watched from a distance as the family facade began to crumble. Margaret, once the golden child, found herself cornered. Privilege no longer shielded her. For the first time, she faced scrutiny and suspicion from people who had blindly admired her. Her social media posts, once gleaming with success and luxury, now attracted pointed questions and cold shoulders. At home, my phone lit up with messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Some were sympathetic, others were downright hostile. "How could you do this to your family?" they asked. "Why expose your parents like this?" The guilt trips echoed, but I was no longer the scared girl who crumbled under pressure. I replied calmly, "I'm not exposing anyone, I'm telling the truth. I'm standing up for what's right." My lawyer, Ms. Reynolds, kept me grounded. She advised me to prepare for the inevitable backlash, but also reminded me how important it was to maintain my resolve. "People who've been hiding the truth for years will do anything to protect their secrets," she warned, "but you're building a foundation on honesty. That will outlast their stories." I spent hours compiling more evidence, documenting every instance of financial manipulation and emotional neglect. I even found old voicemails where my mother dismissed my achievements and belittled my choices, disguising their cruelty as concern. One evening, as I sat reviewing the files, I received an unexpected visit from Aunt Carol, my mother's sister. She was a quiet woman who had always hovered on the sidelines but never openly sided with anyone. "Karen," she said softly, her eyes wet, "I'm sorry. I always saw what was happening, but I was too scared to say anything. You deserve so much better." Her words broke something open inside me. I realized that even within the toxic family web, there were threads of support, quiet, hesitant, but genuine. With renewed strength, I prepared for the legal battle that lay ahead. My parents, predictably, launched their own counterattack. They hired high-powered lawyers and attempted to paint me as the villain and ungrateful daughter out to destroy the family. Their public relations campaign was aggressive. They sent letters to clients of the family business, warning them about disgruntled family members and trying to discredit me in the community. Margaret joined the fray, posting cryptic messages about betrayal and loyalty on social media, trying to rally support for their side. But it backfired. People began to see through the smoke and mirrors. Former employees and contractors quietly reached out to me, confirming what I already knew: Mark's leadership was shaky, and the family's finances were in disarray. I used this momentum to grow my own business, a small consultancy focused on helping families manage trusts and estates honestly and transparently. It became a symbol of my commitment to integrity, a stark contrast to the deception I'd endured. The most intense moment came during a court hearing where the truth about the trust fund was laid bare. My lawyer presented damning evidence, bank statements, email threads, and testimony from financial advisors who confirmed my parents' misuse of funds. I looked across the courtroom and saw their faces, my mother's tight jaw, my father's flushed anger, and Margaret's thinly veiled contempt, but I felt calm. This wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming my story and breaking free from their control. The judge's ruling was a partial victory. The court ordered my parents to reimburse a significant portion of the misappropriated funds and placed strict controls on how the trust could be managed going forward. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a start. More importantly, it was public validation of what I'd endured. In the aftermath, my parents retreated into silence. Family gatherings ceased. The relatives who had supported them quietly distanced themselves as well. It was a cold, isolating time for them, but I refused to feel guilt. Instead, I focused on building a new life, one where I was seen, respected, and valued. Mark attempted a reconciliation, sending a hesitant message asking if we could move past this. I read it and then deleted it without a reply. Some bridges were too broken to cross. Instead, I found comfort in my chosen family friends, allies, and my son Mark, whose laughter and resilience were the light guiding me forward. One night, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up and said, "Mom, I love our family. Grandma Sharon and Grandpa Brian always make me feel special. I'm glad you're my mom." Tears welled up as I kissed his forehead. In that moment, I realized I had finally built something real, something no money or manipulation could ever take away. The past would always be there, but it no longer defined me. I was free. After the court ruling, life didn't magically become perfect. Healing is never linear, and the scars left by years of neglect and betrayal ran deep. But for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of peace that wasn't tethered to anyone else's approval. I started therapy, something I'd resisted for years, convinced I just had to tough it out. Sitting with my counselor, unpacking decades of silence and pain, was exhausting and terrifying, but it was also liberating. I learned to recognize the toxic patterns, to forgive myself for the years I blamed myself for not being enough. Every session chipped away at the shame I'd carried like an anchor. I realized I hadn't failed. They had failed me. Outside the therapy room, I built new rituals, small acts of self-care that reinforced my worth. Morning runs in the crisp Chicago air, dinners cooked just for me and Mark, quiet evenings with a good book or music that soothed my soul. My business flourished not just as a financial success, but as a platform for purpose. I began volunteering, mentoring women caught in cycles of family dysfunction. Sharing my story helped others feel less alone and reminded me that pain could be transformed into strength. The silence from my birth family was absolute. No calls, no attempts to reach out. It stung at first like a door slammed shut with no chance of reopening. But I realized some doors need to stay closed to protect your light. Instead, I found new family. Sharon and Brian remained constants in our lives. Their kindness a balm to wounds I hadn't known could heal. Aunt Carol became a surprising source of wisdom and laughter, a reminder that family can come from unexpected places. Margaret faded into the background, a shadow from a past I was learning to release. I chose to focus on the present and the future, on the family I was creating with Mark and the community I was nurturing. One quiet evening, Mark asked me, "Mom, what does family really mean to you?" I smiled, pulling him close. "Family is who loves you when you're at your best and your worst. It's who stands by you not because they have to, but because they want to." He nodded thoughtfully, like Grandma Sharon. "Exactly. As the seasons changed, so did I. The bitterness that once consumed me softened into resolve. I wasn't defined by the past, I was shaped by how I chose to move forward." I thought back to the night I stood in that kitchen, confronting my parents with the deed in hand. The fear, the anger, the desperation, it felt like a lifetime ago. Now it was just a chapter in a much larger story of survival and growth. I no longer needed their validation. I was my own advocate, my own protector. Mark thrived in this new environment. His laughter filled the house, his questions and curiosity a constant reminder of the life I fought to build. Watching him grow without the weight of my family's toxicity was the greatest victory of all. Sometimes I still catch glimpses of the old wounds, loneliness on a quiet evening, a pang of longing during holidays. But those moments no longer define me. I have learned to sit with them, to honor them, and then gently let them go. Building a family founded on respect, honesty, and unconditional love has been my greatest achievement. It's not perfect, no family is, but it's real, and it's mine. To anyone out there trapped in toxic family dynamics, please know this: you are worthy of love that doesn't come with strings attached. You have the right to set boundaries, to choose who stays in your life, and to build your own definition of family. It's not easy. It takes courage to walk away, to say no, to protect your heart, but it is possible. And on the other side of that hard journey is freedom, the freedom to be truly seen and valued. My name is Karen Thompson, and this is my story not of victimhood, but of reclaiming my life. I didn't just survive, I thrived. And so can you. Story 2. My name is Corwin Ellis. I'm 34 years old, and a year ago, my own brother locked me out of the startup we built from scratch, stole the patent I created, the future I believed was ours, and told me bluntly, "Grow up, no one's coming to save you." Standing now on the porch of the house I grew up in, the cold wind stabbing through my jacket, I hold my infant son close. June, my fiancée, is beside me. Her eyes red and lips cracked from worry and exhaustion. We haven't had a real meal in 2 days. The last of our baby formula is gone. The gas tank is nearly empty, and this rickety old place is my last hope. I knock twice. The sound bounces off the walls of a life I'm trying to reclaim. Lights flick on inside. They're home. Malcolm, my brother, answers. That same smug look I've hated for years spreads across his face. He doesn't step aside. "Well, this is a surprise," he says. His eyes flick over me. "June, the baby bundled against my chest. You look rough." I swallow hard. We've got nowhere else to go. Just for a few nights until I get back on my feet. He leans against the doorframe, arms crossed, unimpressed. I don't think that's a good idea. My stomach twists. "Please, Malcolm, we're not asking for a handout, just a roof." He glances inside and I catch a glimpse of our parents sitting stiffly at the dining table. They don't look up. "Listen," Malcolm says quietly, "this house is full. And honestly, you made your choices. You walked away from the company." I wanted to scream, to shout, but I stopped myself. My son stirs in my arms. I lower my voice. "We just need a place to stay. Please." Malcolm tilts his head, amused. "Lend you space with what you gonna pay me back." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I look at him, searching for even a flicker of the brother I once trusted. "I see," I say quietly, "then we'll go." I don't wait for the door to close. I turn away, tightening my grip on my son. June doesn't say a word, just follows silently. The door clicks shut behind us, that hollow sound haunting me longer than the cold wind ever will. 2 years earlier, none of this was imaginable. Malcolm and I were partners, or so I thought. We started small in our cramped garage in Athens, Georgia, tinkering with solar cells, dreaming big. I had the engineering mind. He had the business charm. Our idea was simple but bold: a modular solar panel that could adjust itself automatically, making energy affordable and efficient for small homes and remote communities. I poured months into prototyping, hands stained with solder, circuits fried, failures piling up. It wasn't just a product to me, it was a chance to change the world. We named the startup Helionics. I remember the day our first prototype passed testing. Malcolm drove us out for wings and craft beer, slapping my back and calling me the next Tesla. I laughed, finally believing something good was happening. I handled the tech. Malcolm pitched to investors, made the numbers sound bigger. I thought it was salesmanship. I didn't realize it was deception. When the first major investment came from a West Coast green fund, $1.5 million, the term sheets were only addressed to Malcolm. I asked. He said it was just paperwork. He'd fix it. He didn't. Weeks later, I was blindsided at a board meeting I didn't know about. Malcolm sat at the head of the table, calm, rehearsed, reading a list of accusations: emotional instability, refusing to follow orders, alienating investors. Then the bombshell: he'd filed for sole ownership of the patent, my patent, under his name, without telling me. "We appreciate your work," he said, barely looking at me, "but we need stable leadership moving forward." I was out, locked out of email, removed from servers, erased from Slack. The digital footprint I'd built wiped away. I went to our parents. My mother's eyes flicked nervously to my father before she spoke. "Business is business. Corwin, it's not personal." I told them I built the product, that I was the creator, the one who had spent sleepless nights making this work. Dad shrugged. Maybe next time. Get it in writing. Standing in their living room, surrounded by faded family photos, I realized I was truly alone. Malcolm didn't just take the company, he took my credibility, my reputation. Investors whispered I was unstable. Jobs disappeared, freelance gigs dried up. The startup world I loved had closed its doors on me, all by the man who'd once stood beside me in that garage. Then June came back from a visit, no engagement ring on her finger. She didn't say a word, just placed a can of formula on the dashboard and rubbed her freezing hands. Her silence said it all. We were out of options. That night, parked in the freezing cold, my son coughed until he vomited. June panicked, shaking, trying to soothe him. I sat frozen, staring at frost creeping along the windows. I couldn't sleep. I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe everything I built, all I sacrificed, had led us here, 3 people huddled in a cold car, praying for daylight. But then a knock on the window. At first, I thought it was a cop. I rolled it down, heart pounding. It was Professor Kent, my old university mentor, wild hair, worn tweed jacket, a gentle look of concern. I saw a post online, he said softly. Had to see if it was true. I stepped out, ashamed, vulnerable. Without hesitation, he said, I've got a finished basement. It's not fancy, but it's warm. You 3 can stay there. June didn't speak, just held our son tighter. I nodded, stiff. That night, we slept indoors for the first time in weeks. The space heater hummed quietly. The smell of old books filled the room. I lay awake, feeling small, broken, but also something else. Hope. Because I had a son who needed me, a woman who still believed, and a door finally open. The basement wasn't much low ceilings, peeling paint, a dusty old couch that sagged in the middle, but it was ours for now, a fragile sanctuary from the chaos outside. June worked nights at a diner to keep us afloat, and I spent my days at the local library, scouring job boards and nursing a bruised ego. I applied to every tech firm, startup, even odd gigs that barely touched my skill set. Every rejection chipped away at me, but in those quiet moments, cradling my son Eli, watching June gently stroke his tiny fingers, something stirred inside me, a stubborn flicker of determination not just to survive but to rebuild. Professor Kent was a rock. He never pried, never asked about the past. He just offered warmth, coffee, and quiet understanding. The night I almost broke down sobbing over Eli's rattling cough, Kent just sat beside me, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. You're not alone, he said simply. I started tinkering again, late into the night, the hum of a soldering iron replacing the silence. I couldn't afford a lab, so the basement became my workshop. I recycled parts, scavenged old electronics, and reassembled pieces of hope. Then came the news. One morning, scrolling through emails on June's cracked tablet, I stopped dead at the headline. Tech innovator launches charity in late mother's name to support underserved youth. Malcolm? There he was, standing under a banner bearing our mother's name, smiling like the hero of the story he rewrote. Helionics was thriving under his leadership, hailed as a visionary success. I felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over me. He used her. I whispered, voice tight. June didn't say a word. She just squeezed my hand, her eyes full of quiet sorrow. The final betrayal came in the form of a Facebook post from my father, a rare public statement praising Malcolm as the pride of the family. That phrase hit like a punch to the gut. The pride of the family. Like I was invisible. I confronted my parents at my father's HVAC supply store. The conversation was cold and clipped. Corwin, maybe it's time to stop dwelling on the past. Dad said, eyes hard. Malcolm made something of himself. I didn't choose this, I said, voice breaking. You think I wanted to be homeless, to beg for freelance work, just to feed my son? You're embarrassing the family, he snapped. It's time to grow up. I left before I said something I'd regret. 2 weeks later, Eli's fever spiked again. We rushed him to urgent care, heart pounding. When the nurse scanned our insurance, her face fell. Your policy was canceled months ago. Retroactively, I called the provider, waiting on hold for what felt like hours. Finally, a woman explained calmly that my coverage had ended when I was removed from Helionics' employee list. I remembered Malcolm's promise, I'll take care of the paperwork. Don't worry about that stuff. But now, my son lay in a hospital bed, oxygen mask strapped to his face, and I was told we had no insurance. I maxed out every credit card, sold what little I had, begged help from Professor Kent, who insisted on covering the bills with his pension. I refused his money, couldn't accept charity. Sitting beside Eli that night, watching his shallow breaths, I made a vow I would never ask my family for help again. Not money, not favors, not even their name. Some bridges burn without smoke. Others hold steady. Even when every plank creaks under the weight of betrayal, Kent was my bridge, a steady, unwavering light in my darkest days. One cold morning, Kent knocked on the door, holding a thermos and a slip of paper. "There's someone you should meet," he said quietly. An old student of his, Vincent Hale. Vincent was a venture capitalist interested in clean tech, grounded and smart. I was hesitant, but Kent promised he was different. And when I met Vincent in his modest office just outside Atlanta, I felt a flicker of hope. No fancy suits or pitches, just genuine curiosity. I showed him my prototype, small but packed with everything I'd learned. He studied it, asked real questions, didn't glance at his phone once. "I like it," he said. "I bet on builders, not just blueprints." He offered seed funding enough to rent a lab, buy proper equipment, hire a part-time assistant. He also connected me to pro bono lawyers to file patents this time, under my name. "What do you want to call it?" he asked. I looked at June, who was sitting outside with Eli, singing softly to him. "June Light," I said. "It's not flashy," I added, "but she's the reason any of this is still standing." Vincent smiled. "June Light it is." Within a week, I was back in a real lab. Burnt circuits, cracked panels, missing shipments. The setbacks came fast and hard. But for the first time in years, I felt I was building something mine. Not out of anger, not revenge, but out of love and hope. 3 months later, the first breakthrough came quietly. An email from a mid-sized renewable energy company, Verdanova, interested in licensing. I thought it was spam, but when I read it, my heart lifted. They'd seen a white paper I'd published and wanted to see the prototype. 2 weeks later, I flew out. Vincent insisted on covering the costs. In a converted barn-turned-lab, I demonstrated June Light. They grilled me with tough questions, scrutinized every detail. Then they smiled. 2 weeks after that, we signed a licensing agreement. It wasn't headline news, not yet, but it was solid, profitable, and above all, a chance to breathe. With the first payout, June, Eli, and I left the basement. Our new home was modest, a 2-bedroom rental nestled between sugar maples. Sunlight pouring through the windows. Eli got better. We bought a new nebulizer, saw a specialist. One morning, as I headed to the lab, Eli reached up, grinned, and said, "Bye-bye, Dada." That smile was brighter than any trophy or patent. Then came the podcast invitation. A friend of Vincent's invited me to speak on a mid-level tech show about innovation and resilience. I almost declined. I wasn't polished, had no PR team, no script. June nudged me gently. "Just tell your truth, not the pain, the path." So I did. I spoke about June Light, second chances, building from brokenness. I never mentioned Malcolm by name. The audience didn't need scandal. They needed honesty. And honesty went viral. 500,000 views in a week. Emails poured in, students asking for mentorship, retired engineers offering support, nonprofits wanting to collaborate. A tech journalist called June Light one of the most human startups in clean energy. Then came the donations, small amounts at first, $125, $100, a few thousand. Handwritten letters. Notes saying, "I wish someone had helped me when I was starting out." June cried reading them. I just sat there, stunned, feeling a crack open in the part of me that had been locked away since the night Malcolm slammed the door. So we built from it. With Vincent and legal help from Kent's contacts, we launched the June Light Futures Fund, a microgrant and mentorship program for young inventors from underserved communities, kids with ideas but no resources. We pledged 10 $5,000 grants the first year. Not much, but a start. A place to begin the way someone once gave us a place to start again. At night, I still lie awake, afraid the bottom will fall out, but then Eli giggles in the next room, and June sketches plans for a community garden on the porch. I remember fortune built on fire doesn't just burn, it purifies. Our little rental became more than just a roof over our heads. It became a beacon of possibility. June Light wasn't just a product anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament that even when everything falls apart, you can still build something meaningful from the rubble. Vincent's faith in me and the prototype sparked a flame I thought had died. He wasn't just an investor, he was a believer. His quiet confidence gave me courage, and June's unwavering support was my anchor. When Eli smiled or said "Dada," I was reminded why I refused to give up. But even as I climbed back up, the shadows of my past lingered. Malcolm's betrayal wasn't just about stolen patents or lost equity, it was about trust shattered, family ties severed. It gnawed at me every time I thought I could finally breathe. Then came the unexpected message, an email from a cousin I hadn't seen or spoken to in years, Claire. She'd always been distant, the quiet one in the family, more observer than participant. But her message was different, careful, urgent. Corwin, I know you're rebuilding, but you need to know what's really been going on. Mom and Dad aren't as innocent as they seem. I was wary but desperate. We met at a small cafe, far from prying eyes and judgment. Claire slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, transfer records, and emails, clear evidence of money siphoned away from my name. Funds that should have gone to me, but had instead padded Malcolm's pockets and fueled their lavish lifestyles. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. My parents weren't just silent on my exclusion, they actively enabled it, hiding my rightful earnings and contributions, turning their backs while Malcolm built his empire on my work. Claire's words stuck with me. They always had a plan. You were never family in the way you thought. You were a resource. I felt the cold hollow of betrayal settle in my chest, but with Claire's quiet support, I found a new ally, someone willing to stand with me. Together, we contacted Sarah Jenkins, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who specialized in intellectual property and corporate law. Sarah listened intently, asking the questions I hadn't dared to ask myself. She explained that with the evidence Claire had brought, I had a strong case to reclaim my rights not just to the patent, but to the financial damages I'd suffered. It wasn't just about money, it was about justice, about being seen and acknowledged for once. Sarah helped me understand the legal maze ahead. There would be hurdles, slander, manipulation, family politics, but she assured me, you're not just fighting for a patent, you're fighting for your dignity. Meanwhile, as I poured my energy into June Light, the other side of my world began to unravel. Malcolm, once untouchable, started facing cracks in his carefully crafted image. Investors began questioning his leadership. Key clients demanded transparency. I wasn't surprised. When foundations are built on lies, they eventually crumble. I stayed focused but vigilant, knowing this reckoning was coming. It wasn't about revenge, it was about restoring balance. One afternoon, Claire called, her voice tight but excited. Corwin, I have something, an old recording, Mom and Dad, talking, about you, about the money. We met again, and she played the file. Their voices were cold, calculating, discussing how to sideline me, how to spin the narrative that I was unstable, unreliable, all to protect Malcolm and their own interests. Hearing it was both infuriating and liberating. The veil was lifted. I shared the recording with Sarah, who nodded gravely. This is damning evidence. We're going to use it. In the weeks that followed, a slow but steady campaign of legal action began. Letters were sent, depositions scheduled, the family's facade started to crack under the weight of truth. Through it all, June and Eli were my sanctuary. When the pressure mounted and the phone rang with threats or manipulation, June's steady presence grounded me. Eli's innocent laughter reminded me what this fight was really for. During this tumultuous time, I reconnected with old friends and new supporters. The tech community rallied behind June Light, sending words of encouragement, mentorship offers, even small donations to the Futures Fund. It was a reminder I was not alone, not anymore. Then, the biggest surprise came in the form of an invitation to speak at a regional clean energy conference. The organizer had heard my story through the grapevine and wanted me to share not just my invention, but my journey. Standing on that stage, in front of hundreds of people, I felt a quiet strength swell within me. I spoke about the setbacks, the betrayals, the hard-fought victories. I spoke about resilience, hope, and the power of rebuilding not just a company, but a life. The applause was overwhelming, but what mattered most were the faces in the crowd: young inventors, entrepreneurs, parents, people who saw their own struggles reflected in mine. After the talk, a woman approached me. She was older, with kind eyes and a soft smile. Your story moved me, she said. I run a nonprofit that supports families like yours, those caught between survival and rebuilding. Let's talk. That meeting led to a partnership. June Light Futures Fund expanded, offering more grants, workshops, and mentorship programs for families struggling with hardship. It wasn't just business growth, it was healing. For me, for June, for Eli, and for countless others. But the personal battle with my family was far from over. One day, an email arrived from Malcolm. It was short, almost hesitant. "Can we talk? I want to make things right." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. Was this a genuine olive branch or another play? June's hand found mine, steady and sure. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." I knew then I wouldn't rush into anything. Trust, once broken, isn't easily rebuilt. Instead, I focused on what truly mattered, building a future defined by integrity, love, and choice. The legal process continued, but now it felt less like a fight and more like reclaiming my story. I wasn't just a brother betrayed, I was a father, a partner, an inventor. A man who had survived the darkest nights and was finally stepping into the light. And that light was mine to hold. The moment the legal papers arrived, my hands shook not from fear, but from a fierce, burning resolve. The long-awaited reckoning was finally here. With Sarah Jenkins guiding me through every step, I was ready to confront the family who had used me, discarded me, and lied about me. Our first formal meeting was tense. The sterile conference room felt smaller than it was, the air thick with years of unspoken grievances and bitter history. Across the table sat Malcolm, slick and confident, wearing the same smug expression I remembered from our childhood. Beside him, my parents Richard and Evelyn looked uneasy, their carefully constructed facades slipping as the truth settled like a heavy fog in the room. Malcolm spoke first, his voice smooth but brittle. "Corwin, I think this whole thing has been blown out of proportion. We all want what's best for the company and the family." I met his gaze without flinching. "What's blown out of proportion is the fact you stole the patent I designed, that you erased my contributions and left me with nothing while you built your empire on my work. That's not just business, it's betrayal." My parents exchanged quick, uncomfortable glances. Evelyn tried to interject, but Sarah Jenkins held up a hand firmly. "Let's stick to the facts." She laid out the evidence: bank transfers diverted, emails conspiring to isolate me, the patent filings in Malcolm's name alone, the recordings of Richard and Evelyn mocking me, discussing how to manipulate the narrative to keep me sidelined. The room fell silent as the weight of those words settled. Malcolm's confidence faltered, his smirk replaced by a tight jaw. Richard cleared his throat but said nothing. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, or maybe just the performance of them. After hours of back and forth, it became clear that the family's house of cards was crumbling. They were forced to acknowledge, at least on paper, my rightful ownership of the patent and a financial settlement for the damages I had endured. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a start, a validation of my worth, and a chance to rebuild on my own terms. Walking out of that room, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. The fight wasn't over, but the battle lines were drawn. I wasn't the same man who had been pushed aside 2 years ago. I was a survivor, a creator, and finally, a force to be reckoned with. Back home, June and Eli greeted me with warm smiles and open arms. Their love was my sanctuary from the storm outside. We celebrated quietly, savoring the small victories while knowing there was more to come. But the biggest battle wasn't legal, it was emotional. Over the following months, I grappled with the complex feelings of loss, anger, and healing. I mourned the family I thought I had, the brother I trusted, the parents who should have protected me. The betrayal cut deep, but so did the understanding that their version of family was never the one I needed. June stood by me unwaveringly. When I doubted myself, she reminded me of my strength. When the nights were long and the future uncertain, she held me and said, "We're building something better together." Professionally, June light took off. Licensing deals multiplied, and we expanded our team, hiring passionate engineers and community advocates. The Futures Fund grew, helping more young inventors than I ever dreamed possible. Each grant awarded was a personal victory, a way to turn my pain into purpose. One afternoon, I received an unexpected message on LinkedIn from an old investor who had once backed Malcolm. His tone was cautious but hopeful. "Corwin, I've been following your work. If you ever want to collaborate, I'm here." It was a sign that the industry was beginning to recognize the truth, that my voice mattered again. But the family saga wasn't finished. One crisp autumn evening, the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was Malcolm, uncharacteristically humble, his eyes searching mine. "Corwin, can we talk?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. The man who had destroyed so much wanted a conversation. Part of me wanted to slam the door. Another part, exhausted by years of silence, wanted answers. I let him in. He admitted mistakes, greed, envy, fear, and confessed how he'd been manipulated by our parents as much as I had. The vulnerability in his voice was raw and unexpected. But forgiveness, that wasn't mine to give, not yet. I'm not here to erase the past, he said, but maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to move forward. I told him I wasn't sure if I could trust him, but I was willing to see where the conversation went. Over the following months, we rebuilt a fragile relationship, starting with shared goals and cautious respect. It wasn't easy. Old wounds surfaced, trust was tested, but the possibility of something real, beyond betrayal, began to take shape. Meanwhile, my parents remained distant, unwilling, or unable to face what their choices had cost us all. I accepted that some relationships aren't meant to be salvaged, and that peace sometimes comes from letting go. Looking back, I see now that my journey wasn't just about reclaiming what was stolen. It was about reclaiming myself, my identity, my worth, my future. The startup I once thought was lost became the foundation for a new life. A life where love was chosen, not owed. Where family meant support, respect, and presence, not entitlement or expectation. The late nights spent coding, the endless rejections, the heartbreak, and the hope, they all led here. To a place where I stood not just as a survivor, but as a man who had turned pain into power. And as I watched Eli run through the yard of our modest home, laughing and free, I knew this was just the beginning. Because sometimes the hardest battles bring the brightest light. Story 3. My name is Ethan. I'm 28 years old, and last night at my brother's victory party, my mom humiliated me in front of everyone. She said, "Ethan's still searching, always falling short." The crowd laughed. My sister leaned in and whispered, "You're just not cut out for this." I wanted to disappear. Before I dive in, thanks for being here with me today. Wherever you're watching from, drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to know who's with me. Now, let's get into it. Growing up, I was always the middle kid stuck in the shadows. My parents, Diane and Richard, raised us to shine, but I was the one whose light flickered weakly. My sister Claire runs a successful law firm. My younger brother Nathan, just 24, recently won a regional boxing championship. And me, I'm scraping by as a freelance graphic designer, juggling a degree I'm funding with late-night coffees and stubborn hope. As a kid, I was the one with pencils in my pockets, sketching trees and people no one seemed to notice, while Nathan threw punches in the backyard and Claire argued her way through debates. Mom's sighs were a soundtrack to my childhood. "Why can't you be more like them?" Dad would just shake his head. I learned early to keep my dreams small, like the sketchbooks I hid under my bed, safe but unseen. When Nathan's invitation to his victory party arrived, I stared at it for days. Family events usually made me feel like a guest crashing someone else's life, smiling through Mom's thinly veiled critiques and dodging Dad's questions about real jobs. But Nathan's message felt different. "You gotta come. Ethan, it's big." For once, it felt like he saw me, not the lost brother who couldn't measure up. I wanted to believe tonight would be different. Maybe I'd finally fit in. So, I dug into my savings, the money meant for a new tablet, and bought a navy blazer that didn't quite fit but looked sharp enough. Standing in my cramped apartment, I practiced saying "Congrats, Nate" in the mirror, hoping my voice wouldn't crack. The drive to the sports club was nerve-wracking. The building gleamed with polished glass and golden lights, a world I wasn't sure I belonged to. Still, I held on to Nathan's text about standing beside him, maybe even hearing Mom say, "You did good showing up." Inside, the place buzzed with celebration. Nathan was surrounded by teammates, his championship belt slung casually over a chair. I waved, but he didn't see me. Mom was holding court near the bar, her earrings sparkling as she boasted about Nathan's knockouts. Dad stood stiffly beside her, adjusting his tie like he did, his posture never quite relaxed around me. I adjusted my blazer again and told myself this was my night too. Maybe I'd make small talk. Maybe I'd tell a story that didn't get ignored. But as I moved through the crowd, the old feeling crept in. I was here, but not really. I found an empty chair near the back, next to a table of half-eaten appetizers. I tried to disappear into the background, but my hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. The music faded, and Nathan took the stage. His voice was smooth and confident as he thanked his coach, teammates, and supporters. I smiled genuinely, thinking maybe I'd get a moment with him later. But then came the line that crushed me. "Family's everything. Claire's been my rock, Always pushing me and Ethan? Well, he's got his art thing, keeping it unique. Laughter rippled around the room, sharp and biting like a paper cut you don't feel until you see the blood. My face burned as I stared at my plate. I forced a laugh, but it felt hollow. Mom then took the mic. "We're so proud of Nathan, our champion, and Claire, who's unstoppable," she said, her eyes cold as they skimmed past me. "Ethan's here too, still searching, always falling short." The room erupted with laughter, louder this time. I gripped the napkin in my lap so tightly my knuckles went white. Every eye was on me, not with kindness, but with amusement and pity. I wanted to shrink, to disappear beneath the cracked linoleum floor. That's when Claire came over, her perfume sharp and her smile sharper. "Don't take it personally, Ethan," she whispered loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "It's just facts. You're not cut out for this." Their words hit me like a slap. A few people snickered, forks pausing midair. I tried to ignore it, but the wine stain spreading on my blazer felt like a bruise branding me an outsider. I slunk to a wobbly chair near the coat rack, the last place anyone wanted to sit, and focused on the plate of meatballs. Across the room, I caught Mom chatting with a family friend. "Nathan's our star. Claire's unstoppable. Ethan, oh, he's still figuring things out," she said, as if I were a lost cause. My throat tightened. I glanced at Nathan, hoping for some sign he noticed I was there, but he was deep in conversation, his laugh loud and carefree. I thought about leaving, about walking away like I always did, head down, pretending I didn't need their approval, but as I rose to go, my blazer sticky with wine and shame. A voice cut through the noise. "Ethan, hold on." It was Marcus, Nathan's trainer, a man I'd met once, solid as a wall and rarely speaking unless necessary. The room went quiet, all eyes turning to him as he grabbed the mic from where Mom had left it. "I've been watching this family celebrate all night," he said slowly, his voice calm but firm. "But what I see isn't pride. I see a man torn down for no reason. Ethan's been out there working, studying, chasing what he loves. And you," he pointed at Mom, and Claire laughed at him, called him falling short. "That's not failure, that's guts." My chest tightened. I held my coat tightly, the crowd's gaze shifting, not mocking but uncertain, like they were seeing me for the first time. Marcus continued, "I've trained Nathan to take hits, but never to dish them out like this. If family means humiliating your own, then I don't want that kind of family." He let that sink in, then looked back at me. "Ethan, you're worth more than this." He set the mic down gently, nodded at me with respect, and walked out. The silence was thick, broken only by a faint glass clink. Mom's face was pale, her fingers twisting her necklace. Claire stared at her plate. Smirk vanished. Nathan looked frozen. I stood there, heart pounding, not from shame, but from something new: recognition. I wasn't the kid who didn't measure up anymore. I was a fighter. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I turned, took a steady breath, and walked out the door, leaving the laughter and judgment behind. The parking lot was cold and quiet, the party lights fading like a bad dream. For the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. The morning after that night, I woke up in my tiny apartment, still wearing the same blazer, stained and wrinkled. The sunlight seeped through the blinds, casting stripes across my sketchpad. I stared at the half-finished drawing, but the lines blurred as my mind replayed everything. The sting of my family's laughter was still fresh, but Marcus's words echoed louder. For the first time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself before: hope. The day unfolded slowly. I checked my phone. No messages from Mom, Claire, or Nathan. Not that I expected any. I didn't reply to the usual texts that barely disguised their disdain. It was easier to ignore them. Instead, I poured myself into my work. Graphic design had always been my refuge. My sketches weren't just lines and shapes, they were fragments of my identity, pieces of the self my family refused to see. I opened my laptop, started a new project, and for a moment, the noise in my head quieted. But the quiet didn't last. By afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Claire. "We didn't mean it like that," she typed. "Your family. Don't take it the wrong way." Her words felt hollow, rehearsed. I didn't reply. Later, Mom called. I let it ring, twice. I wanted to respond but didn't know how. What could I say to the woman who made me feel invisible for years, who dismissed every success I clawed my way to? I was tired of pretending. That evening, I met Marcus for coffee. His quiet presence was a balm to my raw nerves. He didn't ask about the party or my family. Instead, he asked about me, my dreams, my work, my struggles. You're not alone in this, Ethan, he said, voice steady. Sometimes, family isn't the people who share your blood. It's the people who stand with you when no one else will. It hit me then, the truth I'd been avoiding. My family was never going to be my safe place. If I wanted to grow, I had to build my own foundation piece by piece. That night, I finally let myself cry. Not from pain, but from release. Over the next weeks, I started setting boundaries. I stopped answering calls from home unless I was ready to listen without feeling crushed. I told myself it wasn't selfish, it was survival. I threw myself into my work harder than ever, submitting my portfolio to local galleries, chasing freelance gigs. Every small win felt like a brick added to a wall I was building around myself, a wall to protect my dreams from the crushing weight of their doubts. Still, the loneliness lingered. I missed the idea of family, of belonging. It wasn't easy to let go of the hope that someday they might see me not as the other sibling, but as Ethan. One afternoon, an unexpected message popped up on my phone. It was from a cousin I hadn't talked to in years. Saw Marcus's speech. Proud of you. Ethan, if you ever need anything, I'm here. That simple note was like a lifeline. It reminded me I wasn't as isolated as I felt. Around the same time, a small local art show invited me to display some work. It wasn't a big deal, just a corner of a community center, but I treated it like the debut of a lifetime. Opening night, I stood by my drawings, watching people stop, look, and smile. For the first time in years, someone outside my family saw my talent. They didn't mock or dismiss, they appreciated. The night filled me with a quiet confidence. Maybe this was the start of something new. But just as I began to believe, the old wounds reopened. A week after the show, I got a call from my father. His voice was tight, strained. Ethan, you're making trouble. You're embarrassing the family. He accused me of causing division, of making our private struggles public. I listened, numb. It wasn't about me, it never was. I hung up, feeling the familiar mix of anger and sadness. They wanted me to disappear again, to swallow my pride and be the invisible son. Instead, I picked up my phone and texted Marcus. I need your advice. He called immediately. You're not crazy. Ethan, they're trying to gaslight you. Hold your ground. His words were steady, a compass in a storm. Around the same time, I got an email from a local nonprofit interested in partnering for a community arts program. They wanted me to lead workshops for teens in underserved neighborhoods. It was small but meaningful. I accepted. Teaching those kids reminded me why I'd started drawing in the first place, not for applause or approval, but to make something real, something that mattered. As the weeks passed, my circle grew, friends, coworkers, even some distant family members reached out. Their support was a balm to my battered spirit. But the real turning point came unexpectedly. One morning, I found a package on my doorstep. Inside was an envelope filled with old family photos I didn't recognize, pictures my parents had hidden away. Among them was a letter from my grandfather, addressed to me. He wrote about believing in my potential, about seeing my heart even when others didn't. His words sparked something fierce inside me, a promise to live for that belief, not their doubts. With that strength, I decided to confront the past head-on. I sat down and wrote a letter to my parents. Not an angry tirade, but a clear statement of boundaries. I told them I loved them, but I would no longer let their words or actions define my worth. I mailed it. Weeks went by with no response. And you know what? That silence was the best answer I could have hoped for. Because silence means they're out of power over me. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. Healing isn't a straight path. I still wrestle with doubts and loneliness. But every day, I wake up a little stronger, a little more sure. I'm building my life on my terms. And that's a victory no one can take away. The weeks after sending that letter felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to see if the ground beneath me would hold or crumble. I braced for confrontation, for the anger I was sure would come. But instead, nothing. Silence. It was strange. I thought the silence would sting, but it wasn't that simple. It was a quiet void. And in that void, I started hearing my own voice again. For so long, my life had been a background score to my family's spotlight, the muted soundtrack to their victories and defeats. But now, finally, I could start composing my own melody, even if it was just a tentative hum. The community arts workshops grew steadily. The first few sessions were rough. Some kids were skeptical, others distracted. I wasn't a perfect teacher, and I wasn't used to commanding attention in a room full of teenagers. But slowly, through shared projects and late-night prep, something shifted. One boy, Marcus, not to be confused with Nathan's trainer, but a quiet kid with a tough exterior, showed up every week with sketch pads stuffed in his backpack. He rarely spoke, but his drawings were fierce, full of raw emotion. After a few sessions, he handed me a piece, an abstract portrait of a man looking lost but determined. That image haunted me for days. It was like looking in a mirror, seeing someone who was fighting battles that no one else could see. My own work started to change too. I poured more of myself into the designs, weaving stories of resilience and hope into every stroke and pixel. The local gallery that gave me the corner at the show invited me back for a solo exhibit. This time, I wasn't just showing art, I was telling my story. The opening night was quiet, more intimate than the last. Friends from the workshop came, along with some of the non-profit folks and a few strangers drawn by the local press who'd picked up my story. I stood by my pieces, nervous but proud. Then, unexpectedly, Marcus's trainer from Nathan's boxing gym showed up. Marcus, the trainer, he was here, standing in the back, nodding along as he took it all in. After the exhibit, he came up to me. "Ethan," he said, "I told you were worth more than that party. I'm glad you found your fight." I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the glowing gallery lights. As the months rolled by, I began to see the cracks in my family's perfect facade from a new perspective. I wasn't the failure they made me out to be. I was just different, and that was okay. One afternoon, I got a call from an unexpected source, my old college professor, Dr. Simmons. He'd heard about my work and wanted to invite me to speak at a local college symposium on creativity and resilience. I was terrified. Public speaking had always been a nightmare, and standing up in front of an audience that might judge me felt like reliving the party night all over again. But I accepted. The day of the talk, I paced backstage, my heart hammering. When my name was called, I stepped out into the light, eyes scanning the sea of faces: students, professors, a few familiar folks from the art scene. I started nervously, but then I spoke about my journey, the lost years, the family struggles, the small victories. I talked about art as survival, as a language for the unseen and unheard. Afterwards, a wave of applause. Some faces were teary. A few people came up to thank me. One student said, "You made me feel less alone." It hit me that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was part of something bigger. Meanwhile, back home, the silence from my family stretched on. Nathan's championship was splashed across social media, but none of the posts mentioned me. Claire's law firm was booming, and Mom's social calendar was full, but I was erased from the narrative. One day, I found an old voicemail from Dad, left months ago but never deleted. His voice was clipped, distant. "You need to get real. Ethan, life's not a sketchbook. You're running out of time." I listened to it, then deleted it without a second thought. I was running out of time, but on my terms. Around this time, I met Clara, a fellow artist and a force of nature. She was loud and passionate, the kind of person who made you feel alive just by being in the room. We met at a gallery opening and quickly bonded over shared frustrations with family, creativity, and the constant battle to prove ourselves. Clara didn't judge me or pity me. She saw my fire and stoked it. She challenged me to take bigger risks, to believe in my voice. With her encouragement, I applied for a grant to fund a community mural project. Months later, we stood together before a blank wall in a neglected neighborhood, paintbrushes in hand, ready to transform it into a vibrant tapestry of stories and dreams. The mural became a symbol not just for the neighborhood, but for me. It was about reclaiming space, rewriting narratives, and finding beauty in places others had forgotten. Through it all, the past still lingered like a shadow. There were moments I doubted myself, nights when the silence from my family echoed too loud. But I learned to sit with that discomfort, to let it fuel rather than destroy me. Then came the day when Nathan showed up at one of the workshops unannounced. He watched quietly from the back, folding his arms, eyes flicking between the kids and me. Afterward, he approached. "Ethan," he said, voice awkward, I didn't know you were doing all this." I looked at him, searching for something: apology, pride, resentment. There was none, just a glimpse of surprise. "I'm proud of you," he finally said, then turned and left before I could answer. It wasn't the closure I wanted, but it was something. That night, I sat by the window, looking out over the city lights. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, I felt like I was walking it on my own terms, with people who saw me not just as Nathan's brother or Claire's shadow, but as Ethan. The next few months were a whirlwind. The mural project blossomed into something bigger than I imagined. Word spread, and soon the city council reached out, interested in funding more community art programs. Clara and I found ourselves at the heart of a growing movement, a chance to redefine not just neglected walls, but neglected lives. The gallery offered me a solo show, and my designs began to attract attention from local businesses looking for fresh, authentic visuals. I was still scrappy, hustling for every dollar, every commission, but for the first time, I was building something that belonged to me. No more shadows, no more second place. Yet, the past wasn't done with me. One afternoon, I received an email from a familiar address, my mother. The subject line read simply, "Let's talk." I stared at it for minutes, heart thudding. Was this the apology I'd been waiting for? A sign she finally saw me? I didn't reply. Instead, I let the silence grow. Much like the years before, the wound was still fresh, and forgiveness felt like a bridge too far. Then came a call from Nathan. His voice was different, hesitant, unsure. "Ethan, I wanted to say congrats on the mural. It's really something." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thanks." There was a pause, then he said, "Look, I know I haven't been the best brother. I guess I was jealous. You have something I don't, something real." His honesty surprised me. It was raw, messy, and unexpected. "I'm glad you think so," I said. "It's been a long road." We talked for a few minutes, brief but honest. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start. At home, Clara became my anchor. Her energy pushed me forward when doubt crept in. Her laughter breaking the heaviest silences. We planned future projects, dreaming of expanding our reach, bringing art to places where hope had dimmed. One evening, while working late in the studio, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. Curious, I answered. "Ethan, this is Mrs. Simmons, your old college professor." My breath caught. "I saw your talk online. You've come so far. I wanted to let you know a foundation I'm involved with wants to support your work. They're impressed by your impact." Tears pricked my eyes. Recognition not just from strangers, but from someone who'd believed in me when I doubted myself. The funding allowed me to hire a small team. People who shared my vision, who understood art as a lifeline. We launched workshops in schools, homeless shelters, youth centers, spaces where voices were often ignored. The community responded with warmth and gratitude. Each painting, each sculpture, each mural was a story of resilience, a celebration of survival. But life has a way of balancing light with shadow. One night, I got a call. Clara had been in a car accident. She survived but was in intensive care. The world I was building felt fragile all at once. I rushed to the hospital, clutching Eli in my arms. The hours stretched endless as machines beeped and monitors blinked. I held Clara's hand, promising her we'd keep fighting. Her recovery was slow, but her spirit remained unbroken. Through her struggle, I saw my own strength reflected back. During those days, my phone lit up with messages, friends, colleagues. Even Nathan reached out with cautious words of support. It felt like the fractured pieces of my family life were beginning to realign, however imperfectly. When Clara was discharged, we returned home, both changed but determined. We talked late into the nights about dreams and fears, the art we wanted to create, the community we hoped to inspire. Eli, now toddling and curious, brought laughter and light even on the darkest days. The foundation grew, and with it, my confidence. Yet the question of my family lingered. Was there a place for me there? Did they even want me? One winter afternoon, I received a package, a collection of old family photos and letters from an aunt I barely knew. She'd heard about my work and wanted me to have these memories, hoping they might heal old wounds. As I sifted through the fragile papers, I saw moments I'd forgotten, the tentative smiles of a younger Nathan in me, the proud glances of my parents on birthdays and graduations, but I also saw the cracks, the sidelined moments, the unspoken words, the quiet favoritism. It was a reminder that families are complicated, messy, that love sometimes comes wrapped in pain. I folded the letters carefully, feeling a strange peace. I was ready to write my own story now. No longer Ethan, the overlooked son, but Ethan, the artist, the father, the man who built light from darkness,